Some people argue Israel emerged from necessity, a desperate response to catastrophe. Others insist it sprang from ancient longing, 2,000 years of prayers finally answered. But what if one of the most successful national movement of the 20th century was neither inevitable nor miraculous, but something stranger? A political experiment that succeeded despite the odds stacked against it? Previous histories overwhelmingly focused on the Arab-Israeli conflict. They treated Israel as a problem to be explained. Anita Shapira's Israel, A History, does something different. She presents Israel as a society marked by internal debates, economic structures, cultural struggles, and competing visions of the future. A society that also shaped by external conflicts. Anita Shapira is one of Israel's most distinguished historians. She is professor emerita at Tel Aviv University, where she shaped a generation of scholars. Her expertise rests on decades of archival research into Zionism, labor movements, and the uses of force in nation building. Among her influential works are Land and Power, The Zionist Resort to Force, and a definitive biography of Berl Katznelson, architect of labor Zionism. The story begins in 1881. Waves of violence swept through Jewish communities in the Russian Empire. These attacks were known as pogroms, from the Russian word meaning to wreak havoc. Entire towns were destroyed. Families fled with nothing. The violence was not random. It was systematic, often encouraged by authorities. Young Jewish intellectuals who had believed in integration watched their hopes collapse. A small group formed in response. They called themselves Hovevei Zion, lovers of Zion. Their answer was radical for its time. Leave Europe entirely. Establish agricultural settlements in the Ottoman province of Palestine. Rebuild Jewish life from the ground up. This was not a mass movement. The first wave of immigration, later called the first Aliyah from the Hebrew word meaning ascent, brought about 25,000 people between 1882 and 1903. Most came from Russia. They were idealists, not farmers. They had never worked land. Many died from malaria. More returned to Europe. But a handful persisted. They founded settlements like Rishon LeZion and Petah Tikva. They struggled with Ottoman bureaucracy, swamps, and their own inexperience. What kept them going was not hope, but the absence of alternatives. Then came Theodor Herzl, an assimilated Viennese journalist. He witnessed the Dreyfus Affair in France. A Jewish army captain was falsely accused of treason, convicted despite his innocence, while mobs in Paris shouted death to the Jews. Herzl concluded that integration had failed permanently. In 1896, he published Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state. His argument was simple. Jews are a people without a land, persecuted everywhere, tolerated nowhere. They need sovereignty, not autonomy, not rights, but sovereignty. A state of their own, recognized by international law. Herzl founded the Zionist organization in 1897. He met with emperors, sultans, and ministers. He sought a charter, formal permission to establish a Jewish homeland. He considered Argentina, Uganda, anywhere that might accept Jews. But the movement insisted on Palestine. Not because it was empty, it was not, but because it was Zion, the historical homeland. The only place that could unite secular and religious Jews under one vision. Herzl died in 1904, exhausted, having secured no charter. His movement seemed to have achieved nothing tangible, except one thing. It had convinced thousands that statehood was possible. The second Aliyah arrived between 1904 and 1914. These immigrants were different. They were socialists, shaped by revolutionary movements in Russia. They rejected both capitalism and traditional Jewish life. They believed in physical labor, collective ownership, and Hebrew as a spoken language. Not the sacred language of prayer, but a secular modern tongue for daily use. They founded the first kibbutzim, collective farms where property was shared, decisions made communally, and children raised together. This was not just settlement, it was social engineering. Here is where historians disagree. Some argue the socialist pioneers were the true founders of Israel. Their institutions, labor unions, collective farms, self-defense organizations, created the infrastructure for statehood. Others point out that they were a minority, dependent on funding from wealthy European Jews they claimed to despise. Most immigrants during this period were not socialists at all. Both views are correct. The socialists shaped the institutions, but they could not have survived without support from the very diaspora communities they rejected. The settlers encountered the Ottoman Empire, a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state that had ruled the region for 4 centuries. Ottoman law was complex, land ownership was ambiguous, much land was state-owned, leased to tenant farmers who worked it for generations, but held no title. The Zionists purchased land legally, usually from absentee Arab landlords in Beirut or Damascus. But purchase meant eviction. Tenant farmers lost their livelihoods. The Zionists believed they were redeeming empty land. The local population, Arab peasants both Muslim and Christian, saw foreigners taking their fields. The first armed clashes were small-scale. A dispute over grazing rights, a confrontation over a boundary. Jewish settlements hired guards, often local Arabs, sometimes Circassians, a Muslim ethnic group resettled by the Ottomans. But the socialist pioneers rejected this arrangement. They founded Hashomer, the Watchmen, a Jewish self-defense organization. They insisted that Jews must defend themselves, that reliance on non-Jewish guards was a form of moral weakness. This was not merely practical, it was ideological. Defense became a value in itself. The local Arab population was not monolithic. Some sold land to Jews and profited, some worked in Jewish settlements and earned higher wages than elsewhere. But a political awakening was beginning. Arab intellectuals in Jerusalem and Jaffa started to see the Zionist project as a threat. Not because of any single incident, but because the pattern was clear. The Jews were not coming as individuals seeking refuge. They were coming as a movement, with institutions, with land purchases, with a vision of sovereignty. The question was not whether conflict would come. The question was, when? World War I shattered the old order. The Ottoman Empire entered on the side of Germany. The British saw opportunity. In 1917, Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issued a declaration. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. The language was carefully vague. National home was not state. In Palestine was not all of Palestine. But for the Zionists, it was a breakthrough. A great power had endorsed their vision. The British conquered Palestine in 1917. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. The League of Nations granted Britain a mandate to govern the territory and facilitate the creation of a Jewish national home while safeguarding the rights of non-Jewish communities. This was an impossible mandate. The two goals were contradictory. Britain would spend 30 years trying to balance them and fail. Under British rule, the Yishuv, the Jewish community in Palestine from the Hebrew word meaning settlement, began to function as a state in waiting. It was not yet sovereign, but it built the institutions of sovereignty anyway. The Jewish Agency became a quasi-government. The Histadrut, the General Federation of Jewish Labor, controlled not just unions, but industries, healthcare, housing. The Haganah, the defense, became an underground army. Hebrew University opened in Jerusalem. Tel Aviv grew from a small neighborhood into a city. Immigration accelerated in the 1920s and 1930s. The Third Aliyah brought pioneers after World War I. The Fourth Aliyah brought middle-class families fleeing economic crisis in Poland. Then came the Fifth Aliyah, 60,000 German Jews escaping Nazi persecution. These were not farmers or socialists. They were doctors, lawyers, musicians, engineers. They brought capital, skills, and a different vision of Jewish life. They built concert halls, not kibbutzim. Arab resistance intensified. In 1929, riots erupted in Jerusalem, Hebron, and Safed. Jewish civilians were killed. Ancient communities were destroyed. The British imposed restrictions on Jewish land purchases and immigration. In 1936, a general strike paralyzed Palestine. Arab workers refused to labor in Jewish enterprises. Armed bands attacked Jewish settlements. The British responded with force, but also with commissions of inquiry. In 1937, the Peel Commission concluded that the mandate had failed. Jews and Arabs could not coexist under one government. The solution was partition. 2 separate states, one Jewish, one Arab. The Zionist movement split over the proposal. Some accepted reluctantly, others rejected any compromise on territory. The Arabs rejected partition entirely. They demanded an end to Jewish immigration and a halt to land sales. The British wavered. In 1939, on the eve of World War II, they issued a white paper limiting Jewish immigration to 75,000 over 5 years, then stopping entirely. Just as European Jews faced annihilation, Britain closed the door to Palestine. The Yishuv faced a decision: cooperate with Britain against Nazi Germany or resist British policy that condemned Jews to death. They did both. The Holocaust changed everything. 6 million Jews were murdered in Nazi death camps. The survivors had nowhere to go. Britain maintained its immigration restrictions. Jewish refugees languished in camps across Europe. The Yishuv organized illegal immigration, smuggling survivors into Palestine on overcrowded ships. Britain intercepted many vessels and interned refugees in camps on Cyprus. The moral bankruptcy of this policy became impossible to defend. By 1947, Britain had lost control. It announced withdrawal from Palestine and handed the problem to the United Nations. The UN proposed partition, a Jewish state and an Arab state, with Jerusalem under international administration. The Jewish leadership accepted. The Arab states and Palestinian Arabs rejected it. Both sides prepared for war. The war began in November 1947, immediately after the UN vote. Arab forces attacked Jewish settlements and convoys. The Yishuv fought back with whatever weapons it had stockpiled in secret. By spring 1948, Jewish forces had turned the tide, securing key roads and towns. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The next day, 5 Arab armies invaded. The War of Independence lasted 15 months. Israel fought Egypt in the south, Jordan in the center, Syria in the north. The new state survived, but at tremendous cost. 6,000 Israelis died, 1% of the entire Jewish population. When armistice agreements were signed in 1949, Israel controlled more territory than the UN partition plan had allocated. Jordan held the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Egypt held Gaza. No Palestinian Arab state emerged. The war created 2 refugee populations. Roughly 700,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from areas that became Israel. Their departure transformed the demographic balance. Israel became a state with a Jewish majority. But the Palestinian refugees remained in camps across the Arab world, waiting to return. Their fate became the core of the Arab-Israeli conflict for decades to come. Israel also faced a humanitarian crisis of its own. Between 1948 and 1951, the new state absorbed more than 600,000 Jewish immigrants. The population doubled in 3 years. Many came from displaced persons camps in Europe, survivors of the Holocaust, with nothing but the clothes they wore. Others came from Arab countries, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Morocco, where Jewish communities faced rising hostility after Israel's creation. The logistics were staggering. A tiny country with a shattered economy had to house, feed, and integrate refugees who spoke dozens of languages and came from radically different cultures. The leadership faced a fundamental question. What kind of democracy would this be? Israel declared itself a Jewish and democratic state, but those 2 identities created tensions from the start. The founders chose a parliamentary system with proportional representation. No single party ever won a majority. Coalition governments became the norm. David Ben-Gurion's Mapai party dominated, but always needed partners to govern. Religious parties gained influence beyond their electoral strength because they held the balance of power. The relationship between religion and state became a permanent source of friction. Ben-Gurion reached an accommodation with religious leaders in 1947, before independence. Known as the Status Quo Agreement, it granted religious authorities control over marriage, divorce, and dietary laws in public institutions. Sabbath observance became legally enforced in some areas, but not others. The compromise satisfied no one completely, but it held. Religious Zionists accepted the secular state. Ultra-Orthodox communities maintained their separate institutions. secular Zionists retained control of the state apparatus. The new state needed an economic foundation. The government adopted a socialist-oriented model with heavy state involvement. It controlled land, water, energy, and transportation. A massive public sector employed much of the workforce. The Histadrut owned factories, construction firms, and a health insurance system. It functioned as both union and employer, creating conflicts of interest that would later prove disastrous. But in the early years, this centralized system allowed rapid mobilization of resources. The state built infrastructure, developed agriculture, and launched industries with strategic importance. The challenge of mass immigration required radical solutions. The state placed newcomers in transit camps called ma'abarot, temporary tent cities that often became permanent slums. Authorities then directed immigrants to development towns in peripheral regions, trying to populate the Negev desert and the Galilee. The policy aimed to disperse the population for security reasons, but it also created a social divide. European Jews, Ashkenazim, dominated the political and cultural elite. Jews from Middle Eastern and North African countries, Mizrahim, found themselves relegated to manual labor and remote towns. The gap between these communities would shape Israeli society for generations. Education became a battleground for identity. The state established a secular Hebrew school system, but also recognized religious schools and allowed political movements to run their own networks. This created what observers called tribal education, each stream instilling its own worldview. The content of history textbooks sparked fierce debates. What narrative would define Israeli identity? Secular Zionists emphasized the return to ancestral land and the revival of Hebrew culture. Religious Zionists saw the state as the beginning of messianic redemption. Mizrahi immigrants brought traditions that did not fit either framework. The resulting tension between integration and pluralism never fully resolved. Cultural life in the 1950s reflected the socialist ethos of the founding generation. Literature, theater, and music celebrated collective values, the pioneering spirit, agricultural labor, military service. Writers like S. Yizhar questioned the moral costs of statehood, particularly the treatment of Arab refugees. His 1949 story examined the expulsion of a Palestinian village. The controversy it sparked revealed deep discomfort with acknowledging darker aspects of independence. But such critical voices remained marginal. The dominant culture emphasized unity, sacrifice, and nation-building. Israel's foreign policy faced a harsh reality. None of its neighbors recognized its right to exist. Egypt blockaded Israeli shipping through the Suez Canal and the Straits of Tiran. Fedayeen infiltrators from Gaza carried out attacks on Israeli civilians. Jordan controlled the West Bank and barred Israelis from Jewish holy sites in Jerusalem. Syria shelled Israeli settlements from the Golan Heights. Israel responded with reprisal raids, often disproportionate and hitting civilian targets. This cycle of attack and counterattack escalated steadily. The Suez Crisis of 1956 transformed the regional dynamic. Egypt's President Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, threatening British and French interests. The two European powers secretly coordinated with Israel to invade Egypt. Israel struck first, capturing the Sinai Peninsula in days. British and French forces intervened under the pretext of separating combatants, but international pressure, primarily from the United States and Soviet Union, forced all three to withdraw. Israel gained nothing territorially, but the war demonstrated its military superiority and secured American security guarantees. By the early 1960s, Israel faced a new set of challenges. The Arab states had not accepted its existence. Palestinian refugees remained in camps across neighboring countries. Arab nationalism was rising under Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. He was the most popular Arab leader of his generation. He spoke of Arab unity and the liberation of Palestine. In May 1967, Nasser moved troops into the Sinai Peninsula. He expelled UN peacekeeping forces from the border. He closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, cutting off Israel's access to Africa and Asia through the Red Sea. Jordan and Syria joined a military pact with Egypt. Arab radio broadcast threats of annihilation. Israeli leaders debated whether to wait for diplomatic solutions or strike first. On June 5, 1967, Israel launched a preemptive strike. Within hours, the Egyptian Air Force was destroyed on the ground. Israeli forces swept through Sinai toward the Suez Canal. Jordan entered the war despite Israeli warnings. Israeli troops captured East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Syria shelled northern settlements from the Golan Heights. On the war's final day, Israel took the Golan. The fighting lasted 6 days. When it ended, Israel controlled territories 3 times its original size. The victory transformed Israel psychologically and politically. The Western Wall, Judaism's holiest site, was now accessible for the first time since 1948. Many Israelis saw divine intervention in the swift triumph. Religious nationalism began to rise, a movement that would reshape Israeli politics for decades. The territories also created a new strategic reality. Israel now held defensible borders, but also ruled over more than 1 million Palestinians who were not citizens. The question of what to do with the territories divided Israel immediately. Some argued for withdrawal in exchange for peace. Others insisted on keeping strategic areas. A third faction believed the entire land of Israel was divinely promised, and settlement was a religious duty. The government initially avoided decisions. It approved military outposts, then civilian settlements near them. What began as security concerns gradually became an ideological project. Palestinian resistance did not disappear with military defeat. In 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization had been founded under Arab state sponsorship. After 1967, it became an independent force. Its leader Yasser Arafat embraced armed struggle. Palestinian commandos launched attacks from Jordan and Lebanon. In 1972, Palestinian militants killed 11 Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics. Israel responded with targeted assassinations of those involved. The conflict became international, no longer confined to the Middle East. Egypt and Syria sought to reverse the 1967 defeat. On October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism, they launched a coordinated surprise attack. Egyptian forces crossed the Suez Canal and overran Israeli positions in Sinai. Syrian tanks pushed into the Golan Heights. Israel was caught unprepared. Its intelligence services had dismissed warning signs. In the war's first days, losses were catastrophic. Israel mobilized its reserves and counterattacked. Within a week, Israeli forces had pushed Syria back beyond the 1967 lines. They crossed the Suez Canal and encircled Egypt's Third Army. The United States airlifted supplies to Israel. The Soviet Union did the same for its Arab allies. Both superpowers feared the conflict might escalate. A ceasefire was imposed after 3 weeks. Israel retained the territories. But the war shattered the myth of invincibility from 1967. The political consequences were immediate. Israelis demanded accountability for the failures. Prime Minister Golda Meir resigned in 1974. An inquiry commission found severe intelligence and military errors. The war also broke the Labour Party's decades-long political dominance. In 1977, Menachem Begin's right-wing Likud party won national elections for the first time. The political upheaval reflected deeper social shifts. Mizrahi Jews, those from Middle Eastern and North African countries, felt marginalized by the Ashkenazi elite that had built the state. They voted overwhelmingly for Likud. Begin surprised the world by pursuing peace with Egypt. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat made a historic visit to Jerusalem in 1977. He addressed the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, and called for peace between the two nations. Begin responded positively. American President Jimmy Carter mediated negotiations at Camp David in Maryland. In 1979, Israel and Egypt signed a peace treaty. Israel withdrew from all of Sinai. Egypt became the first Arab state to recognize Israel. Sadat paid with his life. Islamic extremists assassinated him in 1981. But peace with Egypt did not end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Begin's government accelerated settlement construction in the West Bank and Gaza. The religious nationalist movement now had political backing. Settlements expanded around Palestinian cities and villages. Palestinians saw their land shrinking. Israel justified settlements as security measures and biblical fulfillment. The international community largely viewed them as obstacles to peace. In 1982, Begin launched a war in Lebanon. The stated goal was to destroy Palestinian military infrastructure threatening northern Israel. Israeli forces pushed to Beirut and surrounded Palestinian positions. The PLO evacuated Lebanon under international supervision. Israel installed a friendly Christian government, but Lebanon descended into chaos. In September 1982, Christian militias allied with Israel massacred hundreds of Palestinian civilians in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. An Israeli commission found military commanders indirectly responsible for failing to prevent it. The war became deeply unpopular in Israel. Protests erupted, demanding withdrawal. Israel remained in southern Lebanon for 18 years. The occupation fueled the rise of Hezbollah, a Shiite militant group backed by Iran. Hezbollah waged guerrilla war against Israeli forces. Israeli casualties mounted without clear strategic gains. The Lebanon experience polarized Israeli society. It revealed deep disagreements about military power, territorial control, and moral responsibility. In December 1987, a Palestinian uprising began in Gaza and spread throughout the occupied territories. Palestinians called it the Intifada, meaning shaking off in Arabic. Young Palestinians threw stones at Israeli soldiers. Strikes paralyzed daily life. The uprising was largely spontaneous, not organized by the PLO, in exile. Israel struggled to suppress it. Images of soldiers confronting stone-throwing youths damaged Israel's international image. The Intifada forced both sides to reconsider their positions. Israeli leaders recognized that military force alone could not end Palestinian resistance. The PLO leadership saw that armed struggle from outside had achieved nothing. In 1988, the PLO declared acceptance of a two-state solution. Secret negotiations began in Norway. In 1993, Israel and the PLO signed the Oslo Accords. Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin shook hands at the White House. The agreement created a Palestinian Authority with limited self-government. It envisioned a final peace agreement within 5 years. Opposition to Oslo was fierce on both sides. Right-wing Israelis saw it as betrayal. Palestinian militants rejected any recognition of Israel. In November 1995, a religious nationalist Israeli student assassinated Rabin at a peace rally. The killing shocked the nation. It revealed how deeply divided Israeli society had become. Benjamin Netanyahu succeeded Rabin and slowed the peace process. Palestinian suicide bombings increased. The cycle of violence escalated through the late 1990s. What the full narrative demonstrates is this: Israel's history is one of continuous transformation, driven by war, migration, and irreconcilable competing visions of what the state should be. Anita Shapira's contribution lies in how she reframes Israeli historiography itself. For decades, historians divided into camps. The old guard celebrated Zionist achievement. The new historians of the 1980s exposed uncomfortable truths about displacement and myth-making. Shapira refuses both positions. She writes neither apology nor indictment. She writes complexity. Her method is simple but radical. She treats competing narratives as equally real forces shaping events. When she describes the 1948 war, she does not ask who was right. She asks how each side's understanding of their own actions created the conditions for the next conflict. This is not relativism, it is structural analysis. The orthodoxy she challenges is the idea that history has clear heroes and villains. She shows instead that institutions, traumas, and unintended consequences shape outcomes more than intentions. What this book means for our lives today is this: the pattern the author reveals repeats across the world. Societies born from trauma make decisions that embed future conflict. They build institutions to solve immediate crises. Those institutions then resist change. Israel's military dominance solved the problem of survival. It created the problem of occupation. Its absorption of immigrants built the state. It fragmented the culture. This is not unique to Israel. Post-independence India faced the same contradictions. So did post-apartheid South Africa. Founding myths unite, but they also blind. When you encounter a conflict that seems intractable, ask what foundational choices created the current deadlock, not who is right. What decisions, made under pressure decades ago, now constrain every actor. This is a deeply researched, unflinching, necessary work. It will not satisfy ideologues. It will challenge anyone willing to see history as it was, not as we wish it had been.